So I'm going to talk about Newsom v. Trump 2025. Newsom v. Trump 2025. You got that unrest that's been going on in LA, where Trump went ahead and sent in the National Guard, or federalized the National Guard, but he was also the one that had kind of created the mess with the ICE and the overreach of the deportations. You know, Trump has already deported over 10 American citizens, 10 American kids, and a bunch of them had cancer. Why would you deport American children who have cancer? The 9-0 Supreme Court decision, he was like, enforce the Constitution. What are you talking about? That damn gnome is talking about habeas corpus. What habeas corpus? The Declaration of Independence, it says love, peace, and friendship. No, it doesn't. No, it does not. But there was violence. There were incredible images, right? That car was burning just right there in the middle of the damn street. And then people were driving cars around the car that was burning. So I actually got mixed feelings. I got mixed feelings about the unrest in LA. And I'm just going to give you some updates with the courts. So what are the courts saying? So the U.S. District Court, Charles Breyer, which I believe is the brother to that other Breyer, the Supreme Court Breyer. Charles Breyer had issued a temporary restraining order after an hour-long hearing in a San Francisco federal court. The Attorney General for California, Rob Bonta, had challenged the deployment of the National Guard, or the federalization of the National Guard, because the president didn't properly follow the statute which permits the federalization of the troops. And I'll get to what statute that is. And we'll talk about some Constitution too. So the district court is going to rule on the side of Gavin Newsom. So district court is going to rule on the side of Gavin Newsom. And that means by tomorrow, Breyer had issued an order by tomorrow at 3 p.m., the National Guard would cease being under the president's authority and then would start to be under Gavin Newsom's authority. And Gavin Newsom said that they could go home and go back to their day jobs. So that means by tomorrow at 3 p.m., the National Guard was going to be disbanded out of LA. So the president didn't notify Gavin Newsom about the federalization of California's National Guard before he had did it, which makes it illegal, unconstitutional, criminal. There was something about a phone call or something, and then he told him to do the thing, and it's like, I'm not going to do what you say, I'm going to do what I want to do. And then if you actually read the law says that the president can deploy the troops, but he's got to get the orders to go through the governor. So it's kind of mixed. It's kind of mixed. The president can order the federal troops out, but the governor has to order it. And so I could see a situation where Trump tells Newsom what to do, and then Newsom's like, you know what, fuck you. And so if Trump didn't tell Newsom, talk to him like a subordinate, if Trump would have tried to finesse his orders through Newsom, then this wouldn't have turned out so badly. This is important precedent. Rob Bonta is the Attorney General for California. Rob Bonta didn't want the National Guard to be engaged with civilian law enforcement and immigration enforcement. Rob Bonta is the Attorney General for California. He said that the president had exceeded the statute. And the statute specifically is Title 10. Title 10, and it's like something 12,406. Title 10, 12,406. That's the federal statute. So the Attorney General of California said that the president had exceeded that statute, 12,406 statute, and the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment says America's got certain enumerated powers, but all the other powers that America doesn't have goes to the states and to the people. So Charles Breyer said that the president is not King George III, which invokes the U.S. Revolution. Charles Breyer said that the president must give the California National Guard back to Gavin Newsom by 3 p.m. on Friday Eastern Standard Time, which would be 6 p.m., right? No, it'd be noon. It'd be noontime in California speak. So he says, by noon, you got to get out of Dodge by noon. So this Charles Breyer is acting like a cowboy. So theoretically, at first, this order by Charles Breyer says that the National Guard has to get out of LA by noon. And out of the authority of the president and back to Gavin Newsom. The president had appealed Breyer's decision to the Ninth Circuit, however, and he asked the appeals court to pause the district court's order. The president thinks that he could call the National Guard in to protect federal officials and said that the federal courts and the governors have no say in the matter. Which is fucking ballsy. And that's too much. That's too authoritarian. That's too fucking authoritarian. When I look at all the damn executive orders, this motherfucker, if it walks like a fascist, talks like a fascist, then it just might be an authoritarian, totalitarian fucking Nazi piece of shit. It just might be. So the president said that the governors can't stop him. The governors can't stop him when it comes to the National Guard, and nor can the federal courts. Fuck the federal courts. Fuck the governors. He's the fucking man, and only he's the fucking man. He does not understand America whatsoever. Something about 200 years ago, SCOTUS had already decided the matter. This is 1825. Are they talking about the War of 1812? Charles Breyer had said that when it came to the 700 Marines, though, he didn't know what to do with the Marines. Charles Breyer didn't know what to do with the 700 Marines. He says, I can have the National Guard taken out of the authority from the president's hand and given it back to the California governor's hands, but when it comes to the 700 Marines, Charles Breyer didn't know what to do with that. He's like, no, the president can deploy the Marines if he wants to. You can't take your National Guard, but he can deploy the Marines. After this order was declared, Gavin Newsom said that it was a big day for the Constitution. Do we want to talk about the Constitution? Not yet, because there's still an update. So the district court had sided with Gavin Newsom, and then the Trump administration had appealed to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit reversed what Gavin Newsom had said. What does that mean? It's going to go to the fucking Supreme Court. There's like some sort of appeals hearing on Tuesday. It's going to go to the Supreme Court, which is great. This is important. Trump v. Newsom is going to be important precedent for each and every state. And hell, this might erupt into a full-blown civil war. So Tim Pool, Tim's going to be so fucking excited about this shit. I bet you Tim Pool is just like shooting loads all over the goddamn house. So what's the appeals court going to do? You have a 3-judge panel. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals had blocked Charles Breyer's National Guard decision just hours after he had issued it. Mark Bennett and Eric Miller, these are 2 Trump-appointed judges, and then you had the Biden-appointed Jennifer Sung. So those 3 judges, Mark Bennett, Eric Miller, and Jennifer Sung, all reversed Charles Breyer's decision. The district court says Gavin Newsom is correct, and then the appeals court says that Trump is correct. Well, fuck, what's going to happen now? The appeals court has a hearing that's set for Tuesday. That means that the National Guard will get to stay in LA for another 5 days at least. Unless they could get an appeal in quick. Because, my God, the Trump administration had appealed that thing quick as hell. The damn document's 31 pages. Within hours, within a few hours, they're able to write 31 pages of, like, really intelligent, smart stuff. So I don't know how good California's lawyers are. Whoever's working for Gavin Newsom, I don't know how smart this Bonta is. What's his name? Rob Bonta. But theoretically, if the Trump administration could within hours, then California could file an appeal within hours as well. So Mark Bennett, Eric Miller, and Jennifer Singh went ahead and reversed Charles Breyer's decision. The National Guard will stay in LA for at least another 5 days. At least. Charles Breyer wrote that the LA protests fall far short of a legitimate rebellion, and that the sporadic violence wasn't an organized uprising. The president had cited a federal statute. Again, Title 10, Section 12,406. I'm going to invoke my authority vested in me in Title 10, Section 12,406. Does that mean there's 12,406 laws before that law? I feel like there's too many goddamn laws. Who's with me? Everybody? Awesome. Hey, can you knock that off? Charles Breyer wrote a 36-page opinion. Charles Breyer wrote that the LA protests fall far short of a legitimate rebellion and that it wasn't an actually organized uprising. So he's saying, Charles Breyer, the district court, okay, there's violence in LA. But the violence in LA, it's not an openly organized, violent, armed uprising, rebellion. This ain't revolution. This isn't revolution against the government as a whole. They're pissed off at ICE. They're pissed off at the overreach. And then this all began at Home Depot. So the ICE were invading Home Depot and like 4 other businesses, and there's the aggressive tactics that the Trump administration is being used. Again, Trump has already deported 10 American kids with cancer. Why is Trump deporting American children with cancer? The fuck is the matter with him? If you're born in this country, you're an American kid. He's deported over 10 American kids with cancer. They got cancer, right? Is that the reason why he deported them? Pete Hegseth had deployed 4,000 California National Guard to LA. Gavin Newsom said that the National Guard's job is fire prevention, to stop fentanyl, to stop the fentanyl trafficking and other state-led missions. It's not to do what Donald wants, it's to do what Gavin Newsom wants. Fire prevention, stopping fentanyl trafficking, and missions. Charles Breyer did not rule on if the president had broke the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act. The 1878 Posse Comitatus Act is actually brilliant. There's also a distinction between the temporary restraining order versus the preliminary injunction. A temporary restraining order is long. It's long-lasting. Wait, the temporarily restraining order is short, and it's not easily appealed, whereas the preliminary injunction is more permanent, more long-lasting, but it's subject to appeal. So it's easier to get the temporary restraining order. It's not easily appealed, but they fucking did it. They appealed it. The preliminary injunction, That'll stay on for a while, but it's subject to appeal. Title 10, all the laws that we're talking about come out of Title 10. The posse comitatus would be on the side of Gavin Newsom. The Insurrection Act, which Trump did not invoke the Insurrection Act, which means Trump has more power than what he has actually used to date. So using this 12,406 Title 10, 12,406 statute is a powerful tool, but he still has the Insurrection Act. Whereas Trump has the Insurrection Act, Gavin Newsom has the posse comitatus. This could turn out into a full-blown civil war. I mean, Tim Pool must be goddamn giddier than a giddy gidster. The Posse Comitatus Act is that the military forces cannot enforce domestic law. The Posse Comitatus is when the sheriff, when the county authorities recruit the citizens. The county authorities cannot recruit the military. That's clearly a violation. When the police recruit the military, then that's tyranny. We don't want a standing army. The whole point of having a militia, the Second Amendment talks about how a free militia, a well-organized militia is essential to a free state. And the Constitution also talks about the militia. After I read this page, we'll get into what the Constitution says. And then there's Federalist Papers. Federalist Paper number 46 and Federalist Paper 29. 29 and 46 relate to what I'm talking about right now. This could turn into a full-blown civil war. We should be paying attention to this. And like I said, I got mixed feelings. If there's, a bunch of chaos and a bunch of crime, it's not just the chaos, it's the crime. It's the destruction of property and it's the injuring of other people. So if you have a bunch of property destruction and a whole bunch of people being injured and seriously bodily injury or maybe even being killed, well, we don't want that. We don't want mass pandemonium where a bunch of people are getting shot, stabbed, attacked, raped, property being destroyed, people being destroyed. We don't want that. But we also don't want a tyrannical government that puts a boot on our heads for the end of all time. So like most things, there's a balancing act. The guy representing the president is Brett Shumate. Brett Shumate is the Assistant Attorney General of the United States. Brett Shumate works for Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi is the Attorney General. There's more protest all around America. There's more protest in Boston, Austin, and New York City. So the shit that's happening in LA is spreading to Boston, Austin, and New York City. I just read that the Missouri governor has activated the National Guard to be on standby for the anti-Trump protest. So that's what Missouri is worried about. Oh my God, are people going to come out and protest? Yeah, it's your First fucking Amendment. You would think that the First Amendment would be protected by both the U.S. government and the state governments. Brett Shumate, the Assistant Attorney General, said that the president is not subject to judicial review. So the Assistant Attorney General is saying, hey, the president is the Commander-in-Chief. If he wants to call the National Guard in, well, fuck it. Who gives a shit? Not even the courts can tell him that he can't do that. That's terrifying. Title 10, there's 3 reasons when the president can federalize the National Guard. Number 1, when America is invaded or in danger of invasion by a foreign nation. Number 2, a rebellion or danger of rebellion. And number 3, when the president cannot enforce American laws with regular forces. So, in cases of invasion, in cases of rebellion, or when he doesn't have enough federal forces to enforce federal law, then he can federalize the National Guard. That's according to Title 10. Section 12,406. So I'm going to take a break now and let's read the Constitution. Who wants to read the Constitution with me? The militia, for all intents and purposes, the National Guard is the militia. The Constitution talks about the militia. Let's start with the Second Amendment, right? You got a lot of conservatives who love the Second Amendment. Well, what does the Second Amendment actually say? A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. That's interesting. So that means if we want to stay a free country, then we need to have a well-regulated militia. And the National Guard is a well-regulated militia, but the National Guard isn't the only well-regulated militia that's out there. The National Guard is just one militia. Now I'm going to read Article 1 and Article 2. Article 1 powers are the president, and Article 1 powers are the Congress, and then Article 2 powers is the president. Why is Article 1 the Congress? Because the Congress is more powerful than the president. And what powers do the Congress have? To provide for calling forth the militia, to execute the laws of the Union, to suppress insurrections, and to repel invasions. Well, hell, that's the same exact thing about Title 10. Title 10, 12,406, says that you can call forth the militia, the National Guard, to execute the laws of America, to suppress insurrections, and to repel invasions. But that's the power of Congress, not the president. So the power of Congress could just nationalize, federalize the National Guard whenever the hell they feel like it. So where the hell is Congress on this? Where's Rand Paul at? Where's Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell? Is he still alive? And then who's the Michael Bennett? What the fuck is Michael Bennett even doing? And then what the hell? What about that senator from California? He just got attacked and beat up. I mean, he's the leader of the militia. He was just knocked down to the ground. So the Congress can federalize the National Guard quicker and more easier than the president can. And then carrying on, to provide for the organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states respectively the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by the Congress. That's really important, Section 2. So Congress can nationalize, they could federalize the National Guard in order to execute the federal laws, to suppress insurrections, or to repel invasions. The next part, to provide for the organizing, arming, and disciplining of the militia. What this next part says is that the states have two important powers. The governor can appoint the officers to the National Guard. The governor can train the militia according to the laws of Congress. So if there is a tension between the president and the governor appointed the officers of the National Guard. So the officers may side with America or they may side with the state. Now Congress gets to organize the National Guard, arm the National Guard, and discipline the National Guard. The states, the governors, get to appoint the officers, and they get to train the militia. So the powers for the National Guard is split. Now that's Article 1. Article 2, what powers do the president have? Because Congress has the bulk of the powers when it comes to federalizing the National Guard. The president is the commander-in-chief of the Army and the Navy and of the militia of the several states. So that's what it says about the president being in charge of the National Guard. Doesn't really go into detail. Just he's the commander-in-chief. When called into the actual service of the United States. So I think that there's a shared concurrent powers. Both the governor and the president get to tell the National Guard what to do. So that's from the Constitution. And now let's take a look at the Federalist Papers. Who's with me here? Who wants to read the Federalist Papers, huh? So the Federalist Paper 46. What does the Federalist Paper 46 say? The only refuge left for those who prophesy the downfall of the state governments is the visionary supposition that the federal government may previously accumulate a military force for the projects of ambition. So is it possible that Donald Trump could take the military of America and use it as his own private little police force? Yeah, that's possible. That's very possible. Donald Trump could use the military of America to go after Democrats, communists, anarchists, anti-fascist. He could just go after, Muslims. It is a very strong possibility that Donald Trump could use the military for his own personal reasons, for his own personal gain, maybe to declare an emergency and then declare himself president for life, maybe to run for a third term in America. Maybe he might come up with some sort of disaster or emergency and declare martial law and then get the military to be his personal henchmen, and then he'll go ahead and appoint himself for the third term and fourth term, and then he'll just be the king dictator for life. If he's the king dictator for life, what are we going to do about it? Are we just going to accept that shit? Well, let's take a look at the Federalist Paper number 46. Federalist Paper 46 says, let a regular army fully equal to the resources of the country be formed, and then let it be entirely at the devotion of the federal government. Still, it would not be going too far to say that the state governments with the people on their side would be able to repel the danger. So according to, is this Madison or Hamilton? According to James Madison, if Trump was to take the military and then just use it as, the king's standing army, then the states would have to stand up. And here he makes the argument, if America, let's say, has an army of about 25 to 30,000, the militia of the states would be so much bigger. The militia of the states would be about 500,000 citizens with arms in their hands, officered by men chosen from amongst themselves, fighting for their common liberties, and united and conducted by governments possessing their affections and confidence. It may well be doubted whether a militia thus circumstanced could ever be conquered by such a proportion of regular troops. So if Donald Trump was to take over the military, then the number of the military would be substantially smaller than the number of the National Guard and the militia of the several states. That's according to Madison. The army would be about 30,000 men, and then the militia would be 500,000. So theoretically, the governors would have a bigger army with the National Guard than the president would have with the Army, Marines, Air Force, Space Force. That would suck if we were getting oppressed by the Space Force. I'd be embarrassed. That'd be embarrassing if the damn Space Force was to take away all of our rights. Last but not least, I'll talk about 29, Federalist Paper 29. It just kind of already mentions what I had talked about from before. But it's saying that the federal government, particularly the Congress, gets to organize, arm, and discipline the militia. And the states get to appoint the officers and train the militia. So the federal government has a lot of power with the militia. They're organizing the militia, they're arming the militia, and they're disciplining the militia. But they're not training the militia, and the appointment of the officers goes to the governors. And then he speculates, if a well-regulated militia be the most natural defense of a free country, it's what our Second Amendment says. And we all love that Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia goes to a free state. Does it not? It's the Second Amendment. Do you know the Second Amendment?